Bam.
This is Robert Olmsted, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
All right, this is going to be cool. I love it. There are very few people in the big world. There are very few people like us. In our profession, there are very few people like us who can reliably, tactically go in. I call our profession, we're combat spies. Hard places, hard people, hard things, sleeping on the ground have had, need to be 100 plus degree, wearing body armor, getting shot at, our kind of spying. It's not something they really teach at the schoolhouse. They don't really write books about the work that we do. Vital to a commander, but hard to build people like us. It's not comfortable. And you typically deploy once, twice, and never touch the ground again in our field, right? You promote right out of it because, you end up leading teams and you don't season and develop that professional capacity that you might on the strategic side or even the stractical side where you combine the two, right? Like, I don't know how long you think it takes, but I think it takes more than like 2 or 3, 4, even 5 deployments before you really are able to sit with some sheikh or build a network in a foreign country where you're speaking or working through an interpreter in a foreign language. So I'm saying all of that just to kind of let people understand there are not very many people like us who can do this kind of thing. What are your general thoughts on that concept of the tactical combat spy and the challenges of building these kinds of people?
Wow. I mean, what a question to start off with. You come out of the schoolhouse and I know I sat down at my first meeting I ever had and I said, look, I don't know anything. And that was true. And the mentors that taught me, like Jerry Walters, taught me everything I knew when I was a sergeant. And, I'd like to think the things he taught me in that detachment for 66 MI led me through the rest of my career and allowed me to go into the field and have a good idea of what I was supposed to be doing. Just because of the attitude that he instilled in me. He said, you got to own the room, and you have to be in charge, even when you're not in charge. You got to be driving the collection. And so I took that with me, and then, I tried to teach the guys on my team, what it was we were supposed to be doing. And hopefully we stay within the law and execute our mission. That's the thing is go to your deployment, don't get killed, and don't go to jail. Those are the first 2 things. And then after that, let's do our mission and let's have fun. But as far as like teaching, guys how to run sources and stuff, and I wasn't an instructor at CIFSO like you. But I was around all of that. And so I'm not going to sit here and say I was an expert. I wasn't going to take Specialist Felmet and make him the best collector in the world. But you know what? I think he probably had it in him to be the best collector in the world.
Yeah. And we tend to not call ourselves experts, but there is an expertise that you develop as you go out. You learn to be. And when you talked about, like, you don't have to be in charge of the room. So one of the things I learned was I didn't have to, like, the worst way to get laid or the worst way to find the bombs is to say, where are the tits? Where are the bombs? Like, you don't just come straight in and ask for the very thing that you want. And so by being patient and building, I found building trust and taking time to build a relationship, the exchange of the important things that were really unknowable, unseeable. So instead of looking for a needle in a haystack, I could develop a field of needles where there was just I could just take a shovel and throw into my wheelbarrow needles instead of having to dig through all this hay to pull out one needle in a miracle. I was just bringing needles to the commander all the time. And he's like, thank God you're here and bring me all this stuff so I can tune my machine. Because the commander's like, you don't have to really tell me what to do. I know how to run my unit. Just tell me how my unit's performing, and then I'll tune it. And so I would try to do my best to never tell the commander what to do. Now, if I'm doing my job great and I'm getting so much stuff for him that he's like, how do I fix this, Pete? I try to never answer that because I don't want to do the staff's job because the staff will try to kill me. But when you get to that point, when you're bringing so much stuff and it's so complex, and the commander's like, man, this is really pushing my ability to improve my unit, and Pete, I need your help, then I can turn him and me to the staff and say, all right, now how do we bring all this brain power in and go, here's where we're at. Now I've really elevated my spy game to where the entire staff is now having to focus the entire unit on this harder problem. And I think that's where that expertise level is now at a higher level. And the network that I've built not only includes more sheikhs, more government officials, but also more Army people. And we're working in concert at a higher level.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I'd like to just put in a word for those, the new guys that are on the street. And I apologize if I get any names wrong in this, but when I was in 101st and we were in Mosul, we had a new soldier show up by the name of Susan Martinez. And, okay. You know, I could tell right away that she kind of was in awe of what was going on around her. And I understood, because I was too when I showed up at the division. You know, and I told her, I said, look, you just got to keep your head down, trust the team that you're on. They know what they're doing. They're going to steer you right. And I said, I can tell right now you're going to do great things. We had an award ceremony that General Petraeus asked specifically to give the HUMINT guys, the HUMINT guys, they were all CI guys from the 165th for the most part. Yeah. But the guys that were working for us, and she was part of that team. And in that ceremony, you know, I had the pleasure of reading off what it said on her certificate. And she had identified an attack that was going to be taking place on the MWR buses, the 3 buses that go up to Diyarbakir or wherever the hell it was they were going for vacation. Right. And so in it, you know, what she had done was debrief somebody that was giving imminent threat information, in that they were going to set up an attack along a cut in the highway on both sides. They had 57, it was very specific, 57 500-pound bombs lined up, or not 500, they were the howitzer rounds, whatever those are, the big rounds. And they had them lined up in the cut, and they were going to wait for the buses, the 3 buses, to drive into this cut, and then they were going to detonate. Now, those buses, as you know, don't have any protection or anything like that.
Nothing. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And when I first saw this report, I thought to myself, wow, you know, I mean, this is really something if it's true, right? And so they sent the EOD guys out there, and sure enough, confirmed there's 57 of these bombs all daisy chained together, all waiting to blow those buses up when they roll by, and whatever it was, a day or something like that. You know, the next day, the next morning, I don't remember exactly. But, you know, through her excellent debriefing, she got all that information. It was corroborated. It was thwarted. And Petraeus stood there, and when I read that out loud, he stopped and turned around and looked at me and was like, God, you know, like, we're giving her an RCOM. You know, like, this sounds like a Bronze Star to me, Chief. And I'm like, yes, sir. I'll give her one today if you want. And I wish I had.
Yeah. Yeah. When you do find that needle in the haystack and you do prevent the thing, or even just stop the patrol from going out, you know, it really is marvelous, you know, because it can take one thing like that one, you're just trying to break the chain. And if the person who's in the chain is like, oh crap, they're hip to us, you know, and they back off, and maybe that mission never goes live again, and they just go to the next spot, you know, it really can be a small thing like that. It can just be you simply doing your job, that you're more aware. They're like, these guys are too aware. Let's go to the next camp. You don't even know sometimes when you prevent something.
Yeah, that's right. No, but in that case, it was one of those rare instances where we were able to confirm with the military unit, and those guys were really grateful. So, you know, that to me, it kind of showed the worth for all of us in the work that Susan did there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, how do you develop that? I mean, so sometimes that walks in, right? Because good Iraqi citizens like, this is the wrong thing. You know, I want to try to stop this. But it's hard to trust that person that walks in, you know, like you get the next one of those reports and it's nothing, or maybe
Yeah.
it was something, but it gets turned off. You just don't know, right? So you're trying to chase down every person that comes in. Across this, you and I both worked in the same area, not at the same time, but like basically immediately after each other. The businesses that were along the line, the road of the airfield there, after you left, basically every business owner was being slaughtered by the opposition. They carved one guy's eyes out. They waited a month and then they killed him. Just horrible things, right? And so it was a very graphic and deadly time for people to talk to folks like us. And so we had to be very careful to have meetings. And so we would leave the camp to not expose them because we knew there was surveillance going on. And I guess this will be the question. We knew there was surveillance going on because you're between two American camps. Just for everybody, there's two American camps and a piece of road going between them, right? And so if someone stopped and they did something, it was obvious to the Iraqis who were watching that something was going on. And there's taxi cab traffic, not a lot of traffic, but enough that someone could maintain surveillance and to be pretty hard to stop it. We could tell the American command, hey, there's surveillance going on. Do you want to shut both ends of this road down and force the Iraqis to go around? And they'd say, not a chance. So there was no effective way to stop the surveillance, right? So we would just go into town for short meetings and just in and out, not big army patrols, just in and out fast, have a meeting undercover and then get out of there. So that was what we did to try to protect sources. But even then, you just don't know. And if you're getting sources whacked, guess what you get less of,
Well, we went to some pretty extreme efforts to protect sources and things like that. I think the most extreme one that I could think of is Steve Coppage was the warrant officer down at 2nd Brigade in the middle of Mosul. They were responsible for Mosul, and they did a raid one night of an apartment building, and I think they dovetailed it with somebody that they needed to pick up. But at the same time, they blocked off a certain amount of buildings and they shut it off. And as they were raiding this other portion of the building, they were debriefing a guy in an apartment on a different level because they could take that opportunity to have a meeting with him without anybody, knowing that they were in the building or anything like that, because there were Americans all over the place. And so they use that type of creative tradecraft, I would call it, to meet with sources. It gets like that, like you got to go to measures to keep those guys safe, and you can't just pick them up at 10 o'clock at night every Tuesday like some people were doing, because that's how you get killed.
So same area, and I can't tell you anymore. Memory isn't that good for what street we were on, and we probably called it, Route Pontiac or something anyhow. But there was an intersection.
I'm sure they changed the routes, man. That was the first thing anybody ever did, was change all the routes, so nobody knew where the hell they were.
Yeah.
All the contractors that were there were like, okay, what are we calling this today?
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I got you. What you're talking about, the street down by the sugar factory or what?
And honestly, I'm trying to think back to where we were. It was kind of down by where the MPs and the Iraqi police would meet a lot. And there was like this little open area. And so there was a guy that I was talking to, and there was just like a couple of buildings, not quite an alleyway, but a little tighter. Maybe a small car would fit through there. But a firefight jumps off because it's Iraq and it's a war. And so a firefight jumps off. And so I'm having this meeting with this guy. This is just a fairly informal thing. This is not like a developed person I'm talking to. I'm just having a conversation. And so there's a firefight. Now, we are not involved in this firefight in any way, but it is American and whoever forces, right? And as we're talking, there's bits of building hitting me in the face. And I'm saying chips, like little tiny, like bigger than dust, but not like chunks, right? And so I just keep talking to the guy, me and my interpreter, and then the other guy, and we're just having this conversation, and it's a good conversation. We're developing, some interesting stuff, and I don't think anything of this because, of course, like this is the daily life, like it's a dangerous place, and for years, it never even occurred to me that I'm having this impromptu source meet during a firefight that we are close enough that there are rounds hitting the building opposite of what we were at. We weren't. at that point, we weren't in any danger. And if there was, we could have gone in the other direction and gotten away from it. But we weren't in danger there. So sure, a little bit of stuff is hitting his face, whatever. But that is like, we are right there in this thing. And in my crazy combat brain, I'm like, yeah, whatever. This is our chance to meet. This is a safe place, but that close to danger, right? And who knows what happens, like if this at all goes awry, which it could at any point in time. But in my mind, great place for a meeting, and I think a reasonable meeting, all things considered. Wrote a little report, sent it up. Nothing big, didn't change the world, didn't do anything, but that is the kind of decision that we make in those kind of cases.
Well, I think you probably have bigger balls than me. I might have called that off there.
It was not that big of a deal. It wasn't all the time. It wasn't like steady. It was like every now and then it would take one, pat, 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 and you'd be like, oh, and then you would keep going, right? Pat, pat, every now and then. It wasn't like constant. I don't want to make it like it was. We had the
guys in Second Brigade were getting shot at all the time. And it was something that we actually had meetings and conferences about, to talk about what can we do to be more safe out there, because it didn't matter if you were at a meeting, you're just driving down the road. They knew who you were sometimes, and they're going to take pot shots at the Humvee with the 42 painted on the back of it, with the old canvas up armored vehicles that we had. I mean, it was scary when you think about it, but you go to war with the army you got, brother.
Yeah. Yeah. When Rumsfeld said that, I'm like, that's true. Everybody's like, no, no, you go.
Yeah, we weren't going to wait 3 years for them to give us new stuff, right?
Yeah. What do you do? I'm always critical of how we left. Like whenever we did this train up stuff, like I sure as hell saw a bunch of PowerPoint slides. I stood in a bunch of lines and waited for a bunch of admin shit to happen. But for sure, nobody ever trained me on the job I was going to do every day. Even if they were intel people, no one had the first clue what I needed to do day in, day out. And no one knew how to prep me for that.
Yeah. Well, when I got to the 101st and I got in kind of late, they were pretty much done with their pre-deployment training. They had done some, John Parker put together some interrogation training and some debriefing training and some training like that. He was in charge of the detention facility and doing the interrogations and stuff like that. So he had done some training, and I think it was useful, but I don't know how much they did as in the source ops. It's kind of hard to set that up on your own a little bit. Usually you go to a course like CIFSO for that type of stuff. You have some experts come back. 101st had none of that. They weren't sending guys to CIFSO. So I just know I stood in front of them and I kind of gave a little speech, and I was trying to prepare them for what was going to happen, because I was like, listen, you guys right here in this room have the best job in the entire division. You're going to be autonomous. A lot of you, for the most part, you're going to be working your own operations. You're going to be deciding what you do every day. And you're going to be the guy or lady that is going to interview the individual that news is going to end up on CNN. And sure enough, we had that happen. We had guys that did things that ended up on CNN, bigger than Stuttgart. And I was just trying to get them into the mindset, like, look, let's go in there with our switch flipped on. Let's go in there let's make sure we got our ducks in a row, that we understand what the hell we're doing. Now, that said, I can remember the first IIRs that ever came in when I was with the division, and it was 2:00 in the morning, and I had waited all day for them. They were supposed to be there at 7 or whatever, but 2:00 in the morning, I got them, and they were really bad.
Yeah.
they were the worst IIRs I'd ever seen written. And luckily, I had a good NCOIC who told me, take it easy. Why don't you go relax, and I'll work with them on the reports, and we'll get better. And we did. And the 101st, for what it's worth, out of the 3 divisions that were in the main effort in Operation Iraqi Freedom, out of those 3 divisions, we wrote 75% of the IIRs. And, you know, they weren't all good. You know, that's
Right.
just the way IIRs are. But
Yeah.
you got to write them. You got to write them, and you
Yeah.
got to publish them, you know. And some of them were spectacular. So I don't have anything bad at all to say about the effort. But 3/4 of the production for an entire, you know, whatever it was, a task force, a 3-division task force, in my mind, was pretty good. So I salute every one of those members.
So let me just put some context in this, because we're using a little bit of lingo here. So I will say this for anybody. Before you deploy in a big unit, you're going to create a list of questions for all of your intelligence assets, especially us HUMINT folks, human intelligence gatherers. And so you're going to be like, here's the things we want to know, everybody. And so a bunch of people sit in a room and they come up with these questions, and you kind of tier them almost like an outline, if you can imagine. And you're like, where are the bombs? All right, what are the questions under where are the bombs? You know, what type of bombs? Are they underground? Blah, 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 blah. And you come up with all these questions, and then you try to rank order them and try to put them in some kind of order so that the person at the bottom of this unit has some fucking clue, because they get basically 200 questions, and they're like, fuck me, there's a lot of questions. And then what Chief Olmsted is talking about is just like, the quality of the questions counts, because I'm going to go out and you're like, where's some guy named Dave Tucker? Well, how am I supposed to do anything with that? You know, I don't know who Dave Tucker is. You know, now I got to go look up the background of Dave Tucker. And so, and I say that because Bo Bergdahl was one of the guys we had to look for all the goddamn time. You're like, who the fuck is Bo Bergdahl? Why do I care about this motherfucker? Then you got to go look that up. So there's all this stuff you have to do, because you don't just go out and ask these questions straight up, because you'll never find out the answer to that. So when he talks about this, the quality of the big questions being asked determines our sub questions and our conversations that we have to build, so that when something happens, we hear something, we're like, I'm changing paths. I call it a magazine of questions. Now I'm going to put in this other magazine of questions and say, hang on, tell me more about this. And so now there's going to be a flow that will hopefully answer one of these IRs.
Yeah, so we could have used you on our staff, man. I'm going to tell you that much.
Well, and so Pete would say, hey, when you division folks are trying to come up with these questions in a vacuum, if you don't have someone who's sniffed dirt in the last 10 years, you're fucking wrong. You need someone, you need a Pete, you know, so who's gone out and be like, knock it off with all these things. Like, what are the things you want to know? Let's keep it simple, and let's figure out what that is, because that person on the ground has to do a lot of work in addition to figuring out how the fuck to answer these big crazy questions. So if you're talking about,
we did none of that stuff.
Right. Yeah. And so
we did none of that stuff.
So I'm already, we know, not prepared, because no one knows how to train us before we go to the field. I don't speak the language, and no one's going to train me how to use an interpreter at a professional level, right? And there should absolutely be a professional identifier that says Pete is trained to deal with any linguist, whether it's an American, soon to be an American, or local. And it's not this bullshit about don't trust anybody. Yes, that's a facet of it, but no shit. How does Pete go out and develop trust and confidence with an interpreter, so that no matter what country he finds himself in, he will be able to develop a working relationship with this person? We never do that. And we need to do all of these things.
Okay. Well, let me tell you something. You know, when I first got to the 165th, I had been wearing a suit and tie for all of my CI career.
Old softy.
This was the first. Yeah, well, you know, hey, somebody had to do it.
Yeah.
But here I am in the 165th, and I'm putting on my BDUs, and I'm going to work, and everybody's wearing BDUs, you know, and we're tactical.
Right.
And I show up, and the first I want to say this because I don't want to talk about Sergeant Rob before I talk about Specialist Felman.
All right. All right.
The first conversation, this is like the new guy showing up, right? The new warrant officer, W1, fresh out of school. We call him Spot. And I have a conversation with Specialist Felman, and I could tell right away he was a smart guy who was probably underappreciated, who had a real attitude about him, so I liked him. And I was having a conversation with him, and he called me Chief. And Jerry Walters had always taught me, never call him chief. Never call him chief. It's not a proper form of address, the whole speech. And I give the speech to Felmet. And Felmet looks at me and goes, okay, I can either call you chief or I can call you asshole. Which one would you prefer? And I went, wow, this is it right here. I'm either going to ruin my whole trip here, or this is going to be a really bad, assignment, or I'm going to say, yeah, chief will work. And that was what I said. And, but I took that lesson from him that, you know what, when somebody's just saying something to you and they're being cordial, don't tell them they're being an asshole. And so I never did that again. And then I walked outside and Sergeant Rob was outside and he had the Humvee out and he was messing with the Humvee. And he pulls me over and he's like, hey, welcome aboard. And Sergeant Rob, he's a great guy. And he says to me, look, and this has to do with the pre-deployment training. I'm bringing it back.
Yeah. You could.
He says, we can do this pre-deployment training that they want us to do. And you know what? It's a bunch of bullshit. And we're probably going to get it again. And we're going to get it up at Darmstadt. And we're going to get it, before we go down range. And when we go to Hohenfels and all this stuff. And so I'm listening to him. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm with you there. He says, or we can take this Humvee and we can build an enclosure on it and make it into a mobile work office and a place to sleep. I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, I got a plan. We'll make it so you can fit 4 people sleep comfortably in the back of this Humvee, a highboy, and we'll have a drop down desk so that you can. And we had just purchased the first laptop from DRMO. We went and got one of them old white bricks, and that's I swear to God, it still worked. We used it. It had a 3.5-inch floppy in it. And we set it up so that you could actually go and do interrogations or debriefings in the back of the truck with a computer, take notes, whatever you wanted. And he's like, so we can either do the training or we can build the truck. What do you want to do, Chief? And I'm like, okay, I already learned the lesson about Chief. So yeah, let's build a Humvee. And he built what was called the Love Shack 2. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure he had somebody christen it while we were downrange. I have no idea. But, that was my introduction to pre-deployment training, so to speak. And, they were right. It didn't, what you guys did in Bosnia, it was hard to prepare for that. Especially the mud and the rain that you guys had to deal with for the first few months.
Yeah, that was tough. And I guess I would say the pre-deployment training, in fairness to everybody above us in the chain of command, they probably had no idea what to put in front of us. They just knew we had to train. And it's one thing in a line unit to say, like a gallon of sweat is worth a bucket of, whatever. But again, how do you do that with interrogators? I mean, when has the Army, the U.S. Army, said we're going to take a bunch of interrogators, not put them in a detention facility, forward deploy them outside the wire, combined with counterintelligence people? I mean, this was all just kind of invented, and so that was already pretty hard. So now we're going to
most of the guys on the tactical HUMINT teams were CI though.
Well, I think it was primarily, but our boss was an interrogator, she was a warrant officer interrogator. So there were interrogators out there, and you talk about not being prepared, Gina, her job, she's like, I didn't know what to do. I don't know what you guys do every day. That's not my job. I'm a warrant officer interrogator, And so she's like, I just kind of let you guys know what you were doing and, ran cover for you guys. I want to get back to something though. You were talking earlier about how pre-deployment, you're saying, hey, you guys are going to have a lot of autonomy, right? And this is another area where in our branch, when we have to do things tactically, man, we have got to learn. Our leaders have to learn how to get their ass chewed, but still win fights, so that we can have that autonomy that we need. Because the sergeant major is going to want us to run patrols. Why aren't you guys on guard duty? And the second you pull out a reg and say, but sir, you're going to lose, right? So how do how do you develop that capacity to say, here's what we do, here's how we do it, here's what the fire hose looks like, and you're going to thank me in 3 months because nobody on this camp can do what we do. And if you get in our way, then we can't do it. And also, by the way, we'll leave. And nobody ever wants us to leave. So how do you develop that capacity?
Okay. So this is a little bit involved because it involves some history. And I'll just refer back to the 101st because, that was the longest deployment I had in a combat environment.
Okay.
And it's where I learned the most. But, when we first started in the 101st, okay, we went over there and I had told my commander, Kristen Valajos Schaefer, who was one of the best commanders I ever had. I told her, I said, hey, we're going to be drinking from the fire hose. There's going to be a fire hose of information. People are going to want to talk. We're going to be the guys they talk to. And she was like, great. Yeah, this is what we want. All right. So we go over there 2 weeks in, we're in Mosul, and she calls me in her office. She starts tearing me a new one and saying, where's the fire hose you were talking about? And I said, well, it's out there, but we're not getting it. And she said, well, why aren't we getting it? I said, because you don't own any of these teams. They all belong to the brigades. I said, you got 1st Brigade, who was commanded by Ben Hodges, who, if you see Ben Hodges on any of the podcasts lately, he's one of the most knowledgeable. He was former USAR commander, but he was a brigade commander at the time. And his guys were doing wheat field assessments. They were going out talking to the grain facilities and the mayors and asking them, how much wheat were you going to produce this year? Because it had some economic, influence on the area. So it was something they needed to know. I understood that, but I'm like, you have guys doing wheat field assessments. Okay. That's not source ops. That's not collecting threat information. That's not protecting. That's not a force multiplier on your battlefield. And she said, okay, so what do we do? I said, well, I don't know. I mean, I could call 5th Corps and ask them if they'll send us some teams. And I did. And, her question was, well, who's going to run them? I said, well, I'll run them, and they put 2 down at the D rear and they put 3 up at the main. I ran the 3 teams at the main. John Parker and Johnny Moncada ran the teams down at the D rear. And we took those teams and we used them to collect threat information. And they were from the 165th. So it all ties back together. We had these Matt Lovelace, all the guys, Mike Playa, Eric Potvin. I can't remember Chris's last name off the top of my head, but he was the best one, staff sergeant. And those guys came and worked their asses off every day, 110 degrees, go out for 6 hours, come back, have to look at me and get debriefed by me because I got to go brief the colonel because they're going to brief General Petraeus what the teams were doing that day, every frickin' day. And those guys delivered for us. And it was the biggest force multiplier that we had were those teams from the 165th. And Petraeus even said so. Like he called down and said, I want to give these guys awards now, right now, next, in this week, because they're kicking ass and taking names. All right, sir, we'll set it up, And, so as far as like, how do you prepare for that? We weren't prepared for that. We were just doing it on the fly. And it was just guys these dudes, some of these guys on these teams were reservists, they were bankers. They were, lawyers or whatever they were.
Yeah.
And it was like, how foreign is all of this to you? But they showed up and they kicked ass and they took names.
Is the job easy?
No, it's not
Is that
easy.
why we can Is that why we can show up unprepared and outwork the problem?
I think, you have a great point. We didn't do enough pre-deployment training. There's not enough individual training. Units like the 101st should take the time to send their guys to SIFSO because you don't know when you're going to need them, And those line units that have CI guys in them, a lot of times they just get stuck in the back of a striker vehicle and told to shut up, until we tell you to do something, then do it. And it might be go on KP duty,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but if
Yeah.
you have good leadership, you try and get your guys out of that stuff and you fight the good fights.
Yeah.
Maybe you're not lucky enough to have a sergeant major as good as Sergeant Major Sandstrom, but
Yeah. Yeah.
you got to have some good officers in there. I'll say this, in the 101st, I was entirely impressed with the quality of their officer corps. Those guys knew how to get things done with absolutely no guidance whatsoever. It
Yeah.
was the old find Hidalgo, take a message to Hidalgo from the Marine Corps school, if you're familiar with that. They
Sure.
just tell the guy, get this message to Hidalgo, and the guy says, yes, sir, and walks off. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's all the guidance that he needed. So in a lot of cases, I fall back on that because those guys from the 165th were absolute geniuses, and they knew how to do the job, but they had never gotten an inch of training as far as I knew. They just showed up on my on my doorstep. Here they are. Here's your teams.
Yeah.
And I walked over and I saw Mike Playa and he hugged me, and that was it.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't always work that well, but when it works well, man, it's impressive, right? And you get a good team ready to collect. They don't get themselves killed or arrested, like you talked about early on, because this is a reality. If you've got a great team, they should be absolutely. There is no more dangerous job in the military, and you have to be endangered all the time. I mean, the enemy should know who you are. I'm a big believer in this. Maybe you'll disagree with me a little bit, but if the enemy doesn't know, and I use my name, Pete, I say it because I want everybody to know who I am, so that when they talk about me, they all know who it is, because that's my job, is to be known. And I want the two to come up to me like, Pete, there's message traffic. They're trying to kill you. And I'm like, awesome. That means I'm on the field. I've got a number and I'm in the game and I'm having an impact. Until that happens, man, I'm out there running around. I'm tackling people as hard as I can, not actual tackling, but you got what I'm saying. And so that is the reality of our job, is it has to be dangerous. And so I have to make decisions that are dangerous. Otherwise, I'm not playing hard enough. And like you said, it is a very gray world as to what is legal. And quite often, this, what is normal and legal and moral in combat does not apply here where I am in Orange County. Those are different places, and you have to be okay with that, because people die. You get people killed. You are trying to save people's lives. The stakes are higher in combat, and you have to be able. And not everybody has that switch. You have to be a little bit of either a trained sociopath or just be a sociopath.
Well, yeah, I am going to disagree with you there, because I just always felt like the safety of everybody was the most important thing. I would say we didn't lose one person. We had people get shot at. I got shot at. Sergeant Clark got shot at a whole bunch of times down the 2nd Brigade.
Yeah.
All those guys, and I hated it. And no, I didn't think that it was something that we had to do. I always thought that we could conduct operations in a manner where we could be surreptitious about it. We had one brigade that was meeting with sources at night on the same day, week after week after week.
Yeah.
And they would drive up to the gas station and stop, pick them up. And, they might have thought it was okay to do something like that. But I was saying, this is how you get 20 guys with balaclavas to jump out of a ditch at you,
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, our source is clean. Our source is good. Bullshit. Your source isn't clean, and you shouldn't fall in love with your source. And you shouldn't believe that they're clean. You should believe that they're dirty, and take what they give you.
No, I agree with you there.
Salt.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's running who every single time, every single day? Who's running who? Absolutely. And I'm not saying disregard safety and everything else, but you have to put yourself in danger.
Well, you got to press
can't-
the envelope. Sure, certainly.
Yeah,
you got to
yeah.
try and. I mean, we were doing stuff that was creative. We were doing stuff that nobody had ever done before. You know, as far as I knew, I mean, I wasn't reading reports in Bosnia that were telling me you guys were running freaking sources in a. We considered it a combat zone. We were getting combat pay, but Bosnia was a little bit different than Iraq, I would say. You know,
Yeah,
and that's not
yeah.
anything, and that's not to take anything away from the guys that worked in Iraq. You're given what you're given, you know.
Yeah.
Or I mean, in Bosnia, excuse me.
Sure. Yeah, and we didn't know how safe Bosnia was, right? Because
No,
we were told it was going to be dangerous, and I
thought it was dangerous.
Yeah. It just turned out it was safer than we had realized. But until the second it's not dangerous, you know, we had meetings. We were like very serious about the threat because we had 3 pistols and 2 M16s. If we got into a gunfight, we were going to lose. I mean, we weren't prepared for that stuff, you know. So
not per individual. You didn't have 3 pistols and an M16.
No, that was all of us. yeah. You know,
and hopefully it wasn't the interpreter that had the M16.
Well, he was a Navy guy, but yeah. But the danger part is real, and you are exposed. And you know, look, who's the first to ground their gear? You know, it's outside the wire. It's the HUMINT guy. At least it should be in my book. You know. And I would tell the commander, I'm like, I'm not going to have a helmet on.
Yeah, well, we had meetings where meetings were going on, and the team would be talking with, you know, whoever, like a mayor or something like that, and then a lieutenant or something from the line unit would come in and see them sitting in there without their helmets on, without their body armor on.
Yeah,
you know, and they didn't understand, like, that's a show of respect to that individual that I'm taking my gear off for you. And besides which, it's 110 in here, and I'd like to be able to take notes or whatever, you know. And then the line unit would come back, and sure enough, we'd get a sergeant major telling us, you know, your guys are out of uniform and all of that. Not my sergeant major, don't get me wrong, but one of the line sergeant majors putting his, you know, foot down about it, which I can understand. But they just had no idea what we were doing.
And that goes back to this whole thing about, you know, like you or the NCOIC, someone has to go manage this for the guys. Be like, hey, you have to understand this is a different job. This is what we do, how we manage. This is my risk that I have to take on. We're not trying to not meet your standard, but our job requires us to do these things. We have to be at more risk than you guys do, you know. And that's the thing. When a counterintelligence team, oh my God, or an agent shows up solo, and the commander isn't. OBC, OAC, MI officers don't know what the fuck a counterintelligence agent does. You think an MI guy showing up for a line unit, you think those guys know? They have no idea. They might think they do, but then when you and I show up and say, look, this is actually what we do, and you and I are going to disagree. I'm even talking, you and I disagree about how we approach and what we do, you know, and so we have to teach these colonels, we have to teach these captains and sergeant majors for sure. Like this is what I do and how I help units. And I'll just tell you my spiel, and because I think this helps the audience understand how you and I both might appreciate this. So I walk into a new unit, whether I'm new to the area or they're new to the area, and I'll just look at the colonel and I'll say, look, I'm Pete, I've been around, blah, blah, blah. You've got a 4-line mission statement. It's going to go something like this: close with and destroy the enemy, protect the force, enable your enablers, teach and train the host nation assets. That's it. So I can help you with all 4 line items. I'm probably going to be most valuable on the last 2 because that's where I'm going to focus most of my energy, because most of your guys' energy is going to be focused on the first 2 line items. If you need me to reorganize that, I will. But my main effort is to make you win more, lose less, make the enemy lose more, win less. That's what I do. And then they're like, copy, Roger. And I need access to the battlefield. You get me out on patrols, I'm on right reports. No one's going to outwork me, but I am one dude. I need you to cover me above. I need you to cover me here with the staff because they're going to hate me. And you're going to want to talk to me. I need you to laser focus me in because I'm going to tell you what I see, and I'm not going to have your vision. I need you to polish my lens, so I am giving you what you need to better run your unit. And I'm telling you all this because this is what all the colonels have told me to tell you. And they also said to tell you this: audacity, audacity, audacity. I'm going to shut up. And then they're like, fuck, All right. Yeah. Go. I'll take that. Go do it. That's what they do. They leave me alone at that
That's
point.
all you had to say. I wish I'd have had that speech.
I know. There's a couple other things. One, if I meet a full colonel, and I would say this as well. Like, you're going to want me to tell you who the most influential man in this valley is, and I'm going to tell you who it is. It's you. And until you stop being the most influential dude, I can't help you make that Afghan or that Iraqi, whoever it is. I can't make that person be more influential. So until you stop doing it, I can't help you. So that's the first lesson I'm going to give you right now. And they get it. They hear that and they're like, no one's ever told me that. And you're right. And I'm like, I know
I'll
right.
tell you what it was like in the real world. So I went over to Kuwait 2 weeks before the division deployed. And it was theoretically to develop intelligence and like have a briefing for everybody when they got there to tell them, what was going on. So I focused on collecting intelligence that was in the battlefield of where we were going to go attack. And I was not focused on our contingency area of operation, right? Because to me it was like, well, it's a lock, you sign for your area and you go occupy it and then you go to war, right? But we were sitting there and the rest of the guys were writing the con-op for going to war. So you have phase 1, which is the initial phase, and phase 2 and phase 3, and then phase 4 is your contingency planning for contingency operations. So like SASO, right? Stability operations. And I said, so I'm like, okay, so where's phase 4? Because that's really where I come in, right? And they're like, no, we're not writing phase 4. I said, why the hell aren't you writing phase 4? Well, there's not going to be a phase 4. We're just going to go kick ass and then we're going to go home, right? No, we're going to be here for at least 10 fucking years. And you better get it through your head. This isn't going to be a 6-month operation, right? Because that's what they all thought.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, shit, then we got to write phase 4, And I said, yeah, it might be a good idea to write phase 4. So they started writing a phase 4. And that was where I punched in all the stuff where like the teams were going to do. We probably didn't even do 90% of that crap. None of it was even, worth the paper it was written on. But that's what they wanted, something written. So I wrote it, here it is.
Yeah.
And, that was the attitude. And then what happened, an interesting conversation was the 3 S2s from the brigades all got together and decided that they were going to be upset at me because I hadn't done threat vulnerability assessments on their contingency areas. And so they're like, they just got there like the day before, and now they've occupied their contingency area. It's the next morning, and they're like ganging up on me and having this conversation with me about why I don't have the threat vulnerability assessments done. I said, first of all, you're going to a frickin' empty contingency area with nothing but cement pads. What in the hell did you want me to do a threat vulnerability assessment on with there's nobody there? You wait until you occupy the space, and then you have your own CI team or HUMINT team that you can task to do a vulnerability assessment. If they don't know how, I'll come out and teach them. But you know what? You have a team. Why don't you use your team? Oh, and by the way, if you want me to come do your threat vulnerability assessments, somebody better update my orders and put rental car authorized, because I'm not driving anywhere right now, buddy. And the three of those guys that I could tell, 2 out of the 3 were a little bit sympathetic to my argument. One of them just never liked me. But it is what it is, that was the brigade that had the most trouble too. So
but it's so, the piece of the puzzle that involves us managing our relationship with our client unit, right? That is going to house us, or we're going to go visit. It's great if we're able to go there and help them out with whatever it is, right? Like if you need a TVA, I'll do that. But I'm going to tell you, like, This is not what you need me to do. Go get some young folks to do that. Go get some NCOs and have them run around and learn that skill. You need me helping build a network of important people, and then, you know, knocking down bigger problems than that. But if that's what you want me to do, I'm going to go do it.
Let's talk about the TVA for a second, though, because the threat vulnerability assessment, or as we used to call them, limited threat vulnerability assessments.
Right.
We all know, you know, doctrinally, there's 13 aspects to a TVA. It includes things like food services. The MPs have a play. You know, there's all these different aspects to it. You're never going to run one of those in the battlefield because none of those other agencies are going to want to commit resources to it.
Right.
So
everybody's busy.
What we did was, you know, the CI guys really, when you first get to a place, don't really have a mission yet because the battlefield's not set. So you can't be running operations outside the wire or operations inside the wire. You know, you're kind of figuring out what's going on. But if you take what information that you want to collect, you know, like how's my physical security? How's my information security? Are we protecting secrets? Are people talking about battle plans in the mess hall? Are people talking about battle plans in the barber shop? You know, go and find that out. Well, how do you do that? Well, go get your hair cut. Sit there and listen for an hour, you know, and that's the job that Specialist Felmet would be going to do, or whoever your specialist is, if you're lucky enough to have Felmet, you know. And he goes and comes back and says, you won't believe the crap they're talking about in the barber shop. Yeah. Well, you know what? That's a problem. So let's figure out what's going on. And you report that to the commander, and you start showing your worth right away by saying, you know, look, here's the problems. I go back to that threat vulnerability assessment that we did in Iskandariyah when the 101st occupied a weapons factory. And they said, we want one right now. Go do it. So I took Phil Wade was my PFC, my driver. And I said, come on, Wade, let's go. And we walked out to the front gate, and the front gate was wide open. And I mean, nobody there. I mean, we're like, what is happening here, right? So I'm like, take a picture, Wade. He takes a picture of the gate. He takes a picture of the building. And you know, and that was the beginning of our threat vulnerability assessment. But we took that report. We finished it in about a half an hour. You know, we walked around, we drove around the corner and found some other findings. And I think they had like 3 significant findings. And I was like, we're done. Wade's like, well, we only did, you know, a little bit of the perimeter. I'm like, it doesn't matter. They're waiting on me. Let's go. And we wrote that up and we put it in pictures, recommendations, all that stuff, arrows on the threat vulnerability assessment, a little 3-pager, boom. My commander and my S3, who was Madelphia Ab, briefed that. And they said at the end of it, that Petraeus said, who did that?
Yeah.
And everybody in the whole room got real silent. And they were like, Chief Olmsted did it. And he said, I want one of these every place we go. I want one of those I don't care. I want one of those every place we go. As soon as we get there, I want him working on another one of these when we move. And that was his order. And they came back, and those, you know, it was just nice to see them happy for a change, because, you know, you're always getting your ass beat in the MI battalion. But that was it. And so we did another one, and I took PFC Wade and I said, look, you see that guy over there taking pictures? And it was a guy with like a beard, didn't look anything like Wade, right? I said, go ask him if you can use his badge. Go ask him if you can use his badge. It's like, yeah, he'll let me use his badge. I'm like, cool. Get his badge, go inside. And he was like a reporter, right? I said, so he had a camera and shit. So I said, Wade, take your camera inside the skiff and take pictures. Wade's like, all right, you know, you sure I'm not going to get busted? I'm like, look, we got a letter from Petraeus saying you're authorized to do this shit. It's okay. So he goes in there. He comes back. He's like, I got pictures of the colonel in charge sitting in front of a classified screen. I'm like, okay, we're not using that picture in the threat vulnerability assessment. We're not here to ruin anybody's career. But
Yeah.
the point is that you were able to get inside of a facility
Yeah.
without. You didn't look anything like the badge. Like, he didn't look anything like the badge. They just let him in and walked around, did his thing.
Right.
And
Right.
those are the
Yeah.
things that are the eye openers for them. Like, whoa, how did you penetrate that? It's like, look, it's
Yeah.
easy if you want to. You
Yeah.
think of a way to get in, you go in and do it. And that to me
Yeah.
is where the creativity of like Wade helped me with that. He came up with ideas. We sat down and we
Yeah.
ginned up the ideas for that little threat vulnerability assessment that we did. I forget where we were. We were at a different location, but just another example of, oh yeah, and by the way, here we are taking pictures with a zoom lens
Yeah.
through the front door of your skiff of a classified map on the wall.
Kind
I
of
mean, I don't know,
has a
maybe it's not
window in the door.
classified, but it says, well, no, it didn't have a window. The door was open because it was hot.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
one that Major Ab gave me. She was like, I have a finding for you. And I'm like, what is it, man? She told me, she's like, they're leaving the door to the skiff open. You can look right in. There's classified stuff on the walls. And I'm like, great. So we get out our zoom lens. I mean, we had a giant freaking camera that we used. We just take a picture.
Yeah. Yeah. We've been talking for almost an hour, and I know, like, you got a whole career full of stories and everything, and all these great names, and it's all just amazing. The job, like you said, it's one of the coolest jobs. You get to choose your adventure and how you approach it and how I approach it. As long as we're getting the commander something they didn't have that morning when they woke up, and they're able to better drive their machine, like that's the goal, right? Like, if I want to approach it this way, and you want to approach it that, we're all helping get the thing done. And that's one of the things I love about how we all do it, because I learn from you, you learn from me. We all make the unit a little bit safer. What would you say is the highlight? Like, man, this is it. It won't get better than this. Or what would you say, like, your best? Like, no shit, there I was. This happened, and I can't believe here we are still. What kind of story about those kind of things do you have?
I mean, what do you want to hear about, bro? You want to hear about the time I drove an APC off a cliff? I'll tell you about that.
Sure. Yeah, do that. Yeah.
This will give you a little bit of flavor for people that never really got to know me, that might have met me, but I think it explains my career. So I was a specialist, and I was driving an APC, and I was driving for a guy by the name of Lieutenant Stewart, who was not my lieutenant. He was just a guy, like, his driver wasn't available. So I had his TC, and I had him in the vehicle, and we're supposed to drive him to go meet the company commander, who's having a meeting at 7 o'clock or 9 o'clock it was, because it was dark and there was no sun or no moonlight. And we're driving in blackout drive, so there's no lights, right? You're just driving. He comes out of his meeting that he's having with his crew, and he gets in the, let's go. Let's fucking go. Go. I'm late. Let's go. And he's yelling at me. Now, this guy was a Mustang, which means he was an NCO before he went to green to gold, and went to whatever it was they go to, the officer school. And he loved to tell stories about how he busted people when he was a sergeant, how he busted privates. And I never liked guys like that. I always knew, man, you got to go the other way when you hear a guy talking like that, because that's not how you take care of your soldiers. So we're driving, and he's yelling at me, fucking go, and I'm driving, and I can see that there's something wrong in front of me. And I'm like, there's something in front of me, and I'm slow down, and I slow down, and I slow down, and I'm like, God damn it. And I'm going this slow, click, click, click. That's 6-inch increments, right?
Yeah.
Click, click. And he's screaming at me on the radio. Go! I'm gonna bust you! I'm gonna bust you! And I'm on the radio yelling back at him, you need to get your ass out of the vehicle and walk in front of me. There's something in front of me. I don't know what the fuck it is, but it's not right. And this motherfucker was like, fucking go, go, go. And I'm like this up out of the track, looking around, trying to see where the hell I'm going, man. Yeah. I see something. I don't know what it is. And what it was the road dropped. There was
Oh
a
my God.
15-foot embankment, and it went down to a road that was down below, and it was cut out, and there was a ditch there. And we went over that, and it was 15 feet. The reason I know it was 15 feet is because an APC is 15 feet long, and that APC, when it stuck, when they came to pull it out, the guys said they never saw anything like that. They pulled that motherfucking thing straight up out of the thing. You could walk onto the back of it from the ground. Okay.
Wow.
Now, when we went over that edge, I'm in the driver's hatch all the way out, right?
Yeah.
I'm bent over that thing. I got nothing. I thought my eyes were going to come out of my skull,
Oh
right?
my God.
And boom, we land. And I was thinking, like, is this it? It's fucking over. What's happening, right? And we stuck in the ditch because of the front of the APC, the way it was shaped, just wedged right in the ditch. But if we'd have been going 20 miles an hour, that would have never happened. And if somebody would have got out and ground guided for me, that would have never happened, right? But when that happened, you think that fucking lieutenant ever said thank you to me? No, not once.
No.
And I saw him at the schoolhouse when I went to the CI course, and he was going through the officer CI course. And all I could think was, I hope I never get assigned with you, man. I hope I never get assigned with you. But you know, but that was the way. And you got to understand, like, if I hadn't had the reasoning to argue with him, and I'd have just said, fuck it, let's go, that would have been it. We would have been dead. And we should have been dead then too. Because why that thing didn't go over, I have no idea. You know, except we were going crazy. Except we were going 6 freaking inches every 3 seconds. You know what I mean? So it was okay. But I'm just saying, like, to me, you know, soldiers have a duty to stand up to their leadership. And, you know, even if it's as small as Felmet telling me that, you know, I should go ahead and let people call me chief because otherwise I'm going to look like a dick the rest of my career. You know, he saved me. He saved me, man. So I appreciate you having me on, Pete.
Yeah. Man, this is great. I love doing this stuff. And, you know, we're so hard on ourselves in terms of security and OPSEC and all this stuff. We didn't talk about anything classified today, you know, and we just talked about like the job itself and the challenges of it. There's all kinds of cool shit that we've gotten to do, but being able to like reveal these things and talk about the challenges of training and still being able to do a great job. And like, you know, like people will reach out to me and say, hey, I'm thinking about getting into this field, you know, and what do I do? And I'm able to mentor these guys. One of the things I've always like, why don't we mentor these young guys? Why aren't you and I going down to Huachuca or out into Utah now where they're training people? And like, why aren't they bringing old heads in and saying, hey, man, we'll give you guys a little bit of money every year. Just come in and adopt some of these guys and, you know, whatever. I don't know why we don't. I don't know why we don't do that, because it's hard to turn these guys into people reliably. And here you have all this experience. So this is my way of sort of addressing that, and also capturing these great stories, because the stuff you've done, the stuff I've done, the stuff that
I know I haven't done much for you on the source operations side, you know, but to be honest with you, you know, the team that I had in Bosnia went to Bosnia without me, unfortunately. And so I didn't get a chance to run sources in Bosnia. I ended up going to the headquarters for a bunch of different reasons. And I was glad I did, you know. It gave me a chance to work with Bart Dashko, you know, Dan Hansen. I don't know if you talked with Dan Hansen, but I don't know whatever happened to that guy.
Dan had a great career.
He was one of those guys that I could tell the first time I met him, you know, this is a straight up dude. He's a good leader, and he's a lieutenant, you know, so let's work together. And
the lieutenants from our company, by and large, like they've had Lieutenant McDermott is a full colonel and has a very impressive resume. Lieutenant Rachinsky, fantastic. I haven't found all of them, but they've all, you know, from what I've been able to find, they've done really well. And so, you know, it was a unit that had its challenges with leadership, you know, and I think that's just sort of the nature of MI, because then you talk to people from real units, like line units, and you're like, oh, well, we just had a bad unit. Like we just had, like, our field is weird, it's wonky, and we don't have the same kind of things. It's hard to manage 15 teams doing 15 different things for 40 different clients. It's just really hard to manage.
But it was always amazing to me, the quality of the people in the 165th, because you could go to each little field office and those guys had good warrant officers, and those guys for the most part had good sergeants, and then you'd meet the younger guys and it was like, you know, these guys are just leaders waiting to grow into it, you know. Everybody in my office in Heidelberg was spectacular, and I never was disappointed in anybody I met in the 165th.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, man. I'm gonna turn the show off and thank you for it. Let's do another one of these things, and hopefully we'll just continue to do these and capture these stories and do like the SEALs and the Green Berets and all these other guys do. All these special people, they tell their special stories, and we'll keep doing the same thing here. Thanks again. Do you want to say anything else in closing before we go?
No, and next time I'll tell you about crashing the helicopter, bro.
There we go. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for